Good afternoon or good evening, but whatever it is, hello. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Vanessa Timmer. And many of you already know that Vanessa took the ECM a mere 20 years ago, in 1996 to 7. So she was part of our third cohort of ECM, I believe that's correct to say. So just one or two words about Vanessa. She's the executive director of One Earth, a Vancouver-based environmental think and do tank, she calls it, which I think is a clue to the kind of thing she's going to say. She's advised in her role as executive director many organisations, including the UN and the US government and the Canadian government. And she sits on a multitude of committees, which I won't go through because I think some of this may come up in her talk. She does write and speak and teaches on social change, sustainability, leadership and systems thinking, which again will come into the talk she's about to give us. She holds degrees from Queen's University in Canada, from Oxford, as you know, and a doctorate in environmental studies from University of British Columbia. Now, two things just to finish off. You may not know, and one is it's quite remarkable. Vanessa co-hosts an award-winning Canadian television show on sustainability. I think it's with her sister, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every week. And I would think that's unique among our alumni, that they're a television host and discussing sustainability. And I'm not sure how that fits into the soft skills discussions we've been having this afternoon, the soft skills required to host television shows. Sam, where are you? You'd better check that out, what you were saying in future, and bring that into your talks. And finally, Vanessa has just been appointed an associate professor at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands on a part-time 6 month here, 6 months there, 6 months in Canada basis. So I hope that means we'll be seeing more of you, since Utrecht is considerably closer to Oxford than Vancouver. Okay, so Vanessa you want to hear, so she's going to talk about how we can manage and create sustainable ways of living. There's a challenging title, so over to Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you. Great. Wonderful. Well, I think probably a soft skill around media training. I definitely, yeah. And just even being able to tell concise stories, as Ken was mentioning earlier. Well, hello, everyone. Really great to be here. And actually, I'm going to start by saying, hi, I'm from Vanessa. I'm from Canada. And the reason I say that is because this might trigger some either good or bad memories with John Boardman, because I would call him numerous times when applying for the ECM, and that would always be my beginning. Hi, I'm Vanessa from Canada, and always the enthusiastic Canadian. But I really want to thank you, John and Brenda, and the ECI team, Tom and Christine and Ian, and I see Clive, who I know from the course, my classmates, there you are. And you know, thank you so much for all of you for making the trip to come and celebrate the ECM with me. John and Brenda asked me to share a bit of my journey and also to give you a bit of a sneak peek at a creative initiative that we're just starting this month. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at first some reflections about the ECM adventure, and then I'll talk a bit about my journey, and then I want you to join me in thinking about how we can use our collective imaginations for imagining possible sustainable futures. So it's 1996, and I'm on a bus going down towards the Boardman's house. It's the first thing we're doing to go on the ECM trip, and I get off at the Boardman stop, and somebody else gets off as well and starts walking in the direction, and I run up to him and find out it's Ken Wright, and I'm like, hi, I'm Vanessa, I'm from Canada, are you going to the Boardmans? And Ken's like, yes. So we get there, we open the door, and there's Yolanda, and there's Emma, and I later meet Dave, and there's Sue and Bjorn, and there's all these people from all over the world. We're, you know, 27 of us, 12 countries, the UK, US, India, Germany, Ecuador, Cambodia, Philippines, Australia, China, Chile, Portugal. So many countries, and even another Canadian, Patrick. Wonderful, but a little less enthusiastic. And there was John and Brenda kind of beaming at us. They were inviting, interested, encouraging. And this set the tone not just for our course, but actually for my experience of the whole sustainability movement. It's really as much about connections and people as anything else. It's about us challenging each other, sometimes rigorously, celebrating our successes and enjoying each other's company. And we would visit, actually it was the Environmental Change Unit at the time, and we were just down the way at the ECM hut, and it was, you know, we would often gather as well around the table, facing each other in the director's seminar, talking about the history of the sustainable development concept. And we kind of dipped biscuits or cake into tea, we shared meals together, and we supported each other as we finished our dissertations and prepared for our exams. And then we really celebrated their completion. And we found out, you know, that we just had each other to support during a kind of a community of support during this time. And we found out quickly that this degree was not just about thinking. It was about human relationships with the earth, and we were going to get right into action. So we were on a bus to Slapton within weeks, sleeping in bunk beds on field trips to conservation areas, swimming in the ocean, living sustainably in Wales at the Centre for Alternative Technology, carefully weighing the wood that we needed for the heating of our camp. We walked through the Lake District, which you see here, in Brighton, Lewis, the Isle of Wight, and we even contemplated nuclear power. We explored the question, how does research inform action on the ground, and what are the lessons from the field that informs our theory? And it was in these fields that John shared his passion for soil. And in the classroom that Brenda lit up explaining energy efficiency. They delighted in sharing their passions with us and invited us into the world as they saw it. And with close to 100 instructors, we were exposed to so many aspects of sustainability and the fabric of sustainability. We got a behind-the-scenes look at the UN Declaration of Desertification by someone who wrote it. We saw how cultural anthropology can help us think about the social norms behind sustainability. And ecologist Clive pulled out a bug-sucking machine to show us how to do a biodiversity count and still be gentle. Each instructor shared their viewpoint. They looked at the problem from different perspectives, or they looked at drivers and solutions or tools and methods. And we saw the big picture, the systems view, a course that revealed relationships and interdependencies amongst a connected dynamic ecosystem, encouraging each of us to play a part. Tim O'Riordan's textbook was so important to us. We kept referring to it that Patrick, with Ken and Roger, made us all fake certificates with fake Tim O'Riordan signatures at the end of our course. And Tim was quite delighted to learn of this when I sought him out during my doctoral studies and became connected with his family. But I shouldn't have been surprised, because this rich approach was right there from the beginning, from the application. John and Brenda encouraged people from all disciplines to apply, from all walks of life: nature conservation, business, game theory, law, political science. And we walked together, collaborated in teams. It was one of my first experiences of coming at these challenges from diverse perspectives. And with that, we found unlikely allies and got right into the messiness of these problems and gained a deeper perspective because of it. So what about me? How did I get there? What drew me to apply in the first place? I was arriving with a major in sociology, a minor in film and theater, and enthusiasm. So let's take a quick look at my story. Basically, it started with a book, this book. When I found out B is for blueberry, it changed my world. Okay, maybe not. In fact, if you look at this picture, I'm not even looking at the book. So this is when I'm 8 years old, grade 4. Vanessa reads well, although she must be careful to only read what is written. Or Vanessa frequently misreads passages in her enthusiasm to finish the story. You know, these report card things were collected by my mom and dad, and so here they are, Dushka and Jan Timmer. You know, they took my sister and me into the natural and human worlds and taught us how to see the beautiful details and the ebb and flow of life, the patterns around us. They were always listening and watching us, trying to figure out what Dagmar, my sister, and I were drawn to so they could support it. 10 months ago, I lost my mom, and perhaps some of you have gone through such a horrible experience of losing someone you love so deeply. I miss her terribly. It seems to be getting worse, not better. She was an amazing, amazing woman and a dear friend. And she was warm, embracing, vital, wickedly intelligent, strategic. She connected deeply with people. We'd call at least once a day and share our lives, and in our times together, we kind of quietly and carefully crafted our lives together and gave our lives meaning. In 1993, she encouraged me, like she always does, to read this new cutting-edge book. It was The Ecology of Commerce by Paul Hawken. And after we read it, she said, "Why don't you call him?" Because we were at Queen's University setting up an environmental group to connect with the business school and other things. So I did. I called Smith & Hawken, his company. They gave me a phone number. I called that phone number, and it was his cell phone. And it was in the 15 minutes he was between two trips. And he said, "Oh my gosh, you caught me, and like literally I'm switching my bags, I'm about to go." And he accepted our invitation to come to Queen's University, and actually has become a great colleague ever since. This wasn't uncommon for my mom. She was a curator of cutting edge ideas, and she always helped Dagmar and I understand what was happening around us and led us to a lot of our international work. For her, every thought leader was a potential ally. And through practice, my sister and I stretched our boundaries, became less fearful, and reached out to those people who inspired us. My dad too, you know, he's just as enthusiastic as my mom. He's open, curious, a fellow journeyer on the road to sustainability, and deeply moved by those who have authenticity and purpose and a calling, such as Edward O. Wilson, the biologist, or Jane Goodall. So in 1989, my sister was sent by my parents to a global awareness conference, and she was so ignited. She started an environmental club in our high school, and then the Environmental Youth Alliance, and I joined her. It was our beginning of our environmental journey. And it was a really heady time. It was 1989, 1990, 91. You know, the world was really interested in environmental issues. Governments, business, citizens, indigenous peoples, media, everyone's gathering around the United Nations Earth Summit. And the Environmental Youth Alliance grew from the 12 of us young people to 14,000 young people in 2 years. It was pre-internet. We did it all through newsletters and hosted conferences. And we were calling on governments to take leadership on environmental issues and on the protection of the rainforest. So there's me at 16 on an Environmental Youth Alliance march with my friend Corinne. And this is where it all began. The question that's been on my mind for decades. We were protesting, but what were we imagining we could move towards? It seemed like the environmental movement was so focused on problems and the crisis that we weren't actually encouraging people to dream. And I don't think we can get to a better, harmonious, sustainable society if we can't imagine it. And I was thinking, how can we get that to happen? So I became curious where social change comes from, you know, and about the social movements of the past for peace, civil rights, gay rights, the women's movement. And my early experience at the environmental movement led me to study sociology. I brought this interest here to the ECM and then continued after Oxford to study social change and movements in my doctoral studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I was convinced that advocacy groups were Jedi Knights who were fighting the dark forces of the world. I soon realized it was more complex than that, and that there were allies in government and business and all over the place. It was so complex, in fact, I spent 9 years doing my doctoral studies. And, I had such high points and such agony, especially near the end. When I'm alone in my room at my parents' house because my scholarships have run out, as an extrovert, writing alone all the time. I did finish, but it was painful, and I had eczema, and I lost my juju. I was not enthusiastic. I'd be like, "Hi, I'm Vanessa from Canada." It was just not good. So I just thought, but you know what? It was worth it for those high points. I was able to connect with the United Nations. I found kind of my academic colleagues and friends, and my Fulbright fellowship at Harvard University with a number of colleagues who are also working on nonprofits. And I focused my PhD on Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. I was really interested in how they set themselves up for adaptive capacity to stay nimble, and did it so differently. One more a hierarchy, one more network. Of course, the added advantage was that I got to meet some of the founders of these organizations, David Brower, and then in 2005, I'm in a pub in Vancouver, Bimini's Pub, at the funeral of Bob Hunter. And all around me is the ragtag group of Greenpeace founders. And they told me stories about how they shaped Greenpeace in their living rooms and how they sailed into the nuclear bomb test zone. And actually, the test didn't go off, but it inspired Bob Hunter to come up with the term mind bomb, which Rex Weiler writes is an idea that rapidly ripples across the consciousness of a wide swath of human minds simultaneously. It's like a pulse, right? Greenpeace mind bombs, connecting peace and environment, transforming our story about the relationship with whales, Antarctica. This is big stuff. And in my doctoral journey, I was inspired by others who had these kind of mind bombs, like Janine Benyus and biomimicry, nature-inspired solutions for human challenges, or Amartya Sen and his notion of human capabilities. And then during my doctorate, I met Bill Rees, who was the co-founder of the Ecological Footprint, measuring the impact of human activities no matter where on Earth they happen. He would ask the question, what is the largest mammal of the ocean? Humans, Bill is a straight shooter. He's kind of like bully pulpit kind of person, bangs tables. When people hear him, they get quite suicidal. After he paints a picture of ecological decline and human avoidance of the problem, but he's much more than Dr. Doom. He's actually just a lovely big heart. His eyes twinkle when he thinks about the possibilities, and he has a deep passion for finding our way home. Home here, to our planet Earth. The Earth is one system that we're all a part of, inextricably linked. And so, with my sister coming back from international conservation work, 2 other colleagues who wanted to take a systems view of sustainability, and Bill, we set up One Earth. We looked at the way we make, take, buy stuff, throw away stuff to see if we can make it more focused on well-being and equity within the limits of the Earth. And we weren't the only ones focused on sustainable consumption and production. At the United Nations, it was a hot topic, and it was up for discussion, and regions all around the world were actually tackling it. Europe, Africa, Asia and Pacific, Western Asia and the Middle East, Latin America and the Caribbean. And do you know how many meetings were in North America? There were tons in those other places. 0. They had no meetings. And I thought, this isn't right. We should be having the most amount of meetings about consumption and production. So we formed One Earth and joined forces with Canadian, US, and international groups in order to tackle this. And we took a multi-angled approach. I pulled in everything I learned from social change and from my colleagues and my teammates, and we tried a whole bunch of things. In the 6 years between 2006 and 2012, we read and spoke to experts about consumption and production. We were invited by the United Nations to co-host the Global Civil Society Forum on Consumption and Production. We made sure that Bill brought his bully pulpit and his suicidal thoughts to wake people up in the UN, and he did. And he spoke on a high-level panel. We wrote reports and briefings. We noticed a lack of connection between research and policy and practice, and so we set up this global research forum on production and consumption, which has now had 3 international meetings and is on its 4th synthetic publication. I spoke at the UN on the UN floor about taking transformative approaches. I became the civil society representative for the UN Environment Program's North American arm and went to their meetings. And Emmanuel, who you see up here, he became the nonprofit representative on the Canadian delegation. When the US and Canadian governments finally had their first meeting in 2008, we were active participants. So active, they asked us to do the next one. So in 2011, in Ottawa, we held the second meeting. And when we realized there wasn't a safe place for governments and business and civil society to speak about this topic, we formed the North American Roundtable on Sustainable Production and Consumption and co-hosted a series of dialogues. And then we thought, yeah, but what about grassroots energy? We knew that that makes a difference in terms of change. So we also formed We Canada, a cross-Canada grassroots youth-led campaign that served as the voice of Canadians in encouraging leadership on these issues and in the international community. We had over 80 volunteers, 30 partners, 12 high-level Canadians signing up. We had dialogues, kitchen table conversations, and a 2-month cross-Canada tour involving thousands of people. So, did it work? Well, in 2012, we got a global framework on consumption and production that was passed at the UN Conference on Sustainable Development. And now, it's Goal 12 of the Sustainable Development Goals. The thing is, it's hard to know if One Earth made a difference in all of that, because we were one of many organizations pushing for this. But anecdotally, I know that the Canadian government was in a meeting and some countries were trying to punt the decision further out. They're like, let's talk about this again next year. And the Canadian government says, we can't. We have this pressure from our citizens who want action on this. And we know that that conversation made a bit of a difference. There's one thing that's certain, just as John and Brenda taught us in the ECM, a lot of this was also about the people. We got such a great community through this. Great friends, great compadres on this walk. In fact, I was meeting with a few of them earlier this week in London because we're on to our next project, which is a UN decade on sustainable ways of living. Speaking of communities, this bottom group who's waving here, some of you might recognize Annie Leonard from The Story of Stuff, right here in the green skirt. This was a North American group that came together with the Story of Stuff project, the Center for Sustainable Production, Clean Production, funders, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, the Center for a New American Dream, the Natural Step. We thought, let's get the team together that's focused on stuff. And we did a mapping, actually, of the whole stuff system and took a systems approach. And out of that came this sense that we needed to focus in also on cities to help them navigate the sharing economy. It wasn't always easy. All these years, we took on sometimes too much and became fragmented. We lost funders. I was talking about this earlier. We lost funders suddenly that we didn't expect and had to be resilient and regroup. We often over-delivered and didn't do what Ken talked about earlier, being concise and making sure that reports were really accessible. And we realized that running a network and collecting your insights is hard to do at the same time because you're doing a lot of personal connections and then you need to do deep thought as well. And those valleys are now guiding us as we shape One Earth for the next phase. Being gentle with ourselves, creating more space for reflection, focusing our efforts, and staying connected to that great community. And we kept coming back to what we learned at ECM. Let's take a systems approach. Let's bridge research and practice. Let's connect with these unlikely allies. And this led us to focusing on cities and the role they can play in sustainable consumption. And we partnered with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, the Garfield Foundation, and a research network, ScoreEye, launching a toolkit and now testing it on the ground in cities. So as of next month, One Earth is going to be leading the testing in the city of Vancouver. So you might say, okay, Vanessa, that's great about all the activities, but what did you learn about actually making sustainable ways of living happen? Well, here's just a few of the things we've picked up. The first thing is, when people consume, they don't just do it for their basic needs. They do it sometimes to talk about their identity. Stuff as almost social conversation. They're buying something to tell something about themselves. So here's hipsters in Vancouver. This is what you need to know if you're trying to indicate hipster to the world. Slightly messy layers, a blazer jacket, unnecessary accessories, etc. So we definitely learned that stuff is also about social conversation. The second thing we learned is we need to get real about the numbers. So if we have a more fuel-efficient car, we're finding sometimes people drive more. So we need to check for those rebound effects and track them. We've also learned not just to place the responsibility on individuals. We can't ask people to repair an appliance or to walk to work if that's just not available to them. People are often locked into the design of their communities, the places they live, their policies, laws, the business models and supply chains, the products. So how do we create an enabling context for sustainable ways of living? And people are also locked in because of habit and social practices, like taking a shower every day. We decided somehow to do that. These are social practices that we all just enact and not necessarily think about. We've discovered these are not totally stuck. When my sister had 2 children, things started to shift because she had to build new habits with this new moment. And actually, we found that to be the case with lots of life transitions. So for example, when you're moving house or shifting careers or retiring, or if you're going to university for the first time, these are powerful times where we can actually start to shift what's going on. But we have to do it in a supported way. I mean, if I walked up to somebody who's in the middle of a renovation or just had a baby and say, here's a list of things you can do differently, they'd punch me in the face, right? Because they're going through so much other things already. So we need to actually support those moments. We've also learned that a lot of this behavior happens when we're rushed. And many of us may feel rushed in our lives. Time abundance is critical to this change. As John DeGraff says, let's take back our time and savor life and create work-life balance in different forms of work. That's a big part of this as well. To savor, to share moments, to connect, to sleep in. And ultimately, we're learning as well that this is not just a technical challenge, it's a deeply cultural one. Shifting from a consumer society of having more and more to a society of more of what matters. So this is what I was just speaking to, these insights, the moving to look at basic needs and identity, get real about the numbers. It's about collective action and these opportunities we have with life transitions, time abundance, and cultural change. But this is the thing. Cultural change. Even after these 20 years since, or even more, 25 years since I had that aha moment on that protest march, a lot of times, even the cities and the partners are still telling this story from a place of guilt and fear and of what we're trying to move away from. They're talking about biodiversity loss and we got to stop this, and not really talking about what we can gain, ecological community and personal well-being. For some people, this fear of a dystopian future, kind of this future that seems so bleak, is a motivator. But for many of us, it might not quite do the trick. We might feel like we want to stay away from it. So how do we imagine what a sustainable futures could look and feel like? And luckily in these 20 years, I found some of my partners in crime along this journey. And one of them's here, Laurie McKillis, who's also a scenario planner, thinks about possible sustainable consumption futures. I was also, after the ECM, went on and worked for a Millennium flagship project in the UK called the Earth Centre. And Sir Crispin Tickell was one of the key imaginaries as part of that. So these were wonderful beginnings of the tribe, this group that I started to get to know that's also thinking about this. And these are a few more. Nicole Boyer, who's a wonderful strategic futurist and a senior associate with One Earth now, John Robinson, Stuart Candy, who's now at Carnegie Mellon, Joe Tankersley, who's a Disney Imagineer, Erica Gregory, and we gathered together and called ourselves Disruptive Imaginings, which I'll come back to later. The idea was really to start thinking about how we can start imagining this at a much larger scale. How can we start getting these stories out there and start co-creating them? And it just got a big push because the Japanese Institute for Global Environmental Strategies and Utrecht University are behind this. So this is the kind of initiative that's just taking off. So, imagining futures. The big thing is, in order to imagine this future and wonder why we haven't done a lot of this to date, we need to go back in time. I want to give you a sneak preview of what's happening, but let's start from a little bit further back in order to move to the future. In other words, we need to go back to the future, which, by the way, is like completely makes my heart sing because I had a major crush on Michael J. Fox growing up. His posters were all over my wall. I had like a little one in my binder for school. I was convinced we were going to marry. He lived in Burnaby, which is outside of Vancouver. And I was even more excited to realize that the time they go to is on my birthday, October 21st, 2015. This was very meaningful, very meaningful. So 2 years ago, we actually reached this date. So did they get anything right? Well, they got a few things right. Like, for example, there's iPads in there and multi-screen televisions, and there's a black mayor of the town, but some things we don't have, like hoverboards that fly through the air. He did get another thing right, which is the distraction of technology, right? There was a big focus on that. The one thing I want to say is, like, fashion-wise, 2 ties, Michael, 2 ties. Not quite sure about that. And I think he's wearing, like, rubber. Look at these guys. They're, like, walking through the streets in a wetsuit with an ironing board. I don't know does this look like 2015? And I don't even want to talk about Biff and his friends. Like, what is that? What are they wearing? So I don't know if this is what you were expecting. It's possible when you're thinking about the future, you might be thinking more like this, like Blade Runner. Or maybe you go down this road. Or perhaps Star Trek. Or maybe Disney's Tomorrowland. This is the thing, we often envision futures from that 15,000 feet up, looking down on a city, and it's often about the buildings. So where did that come from? Well, to answer that question, I'm going to take you back to 1939, the New York exhibition called Futurama. Some of you might be familiar with this. So in Futurama, this was the exhibit at the World Exhibition, and it had a shiny new diorama, this model designed by Norman Bell Geddes. It was the size of half of a football field, and it had 500,000 houses and 1 million trees on it that were all handcrafted. And visitors moved along a kind of conveyor belt that brought them along around this diorama. And they got to see this extensive network of highways, because General Motors sponsored this exhibition. And seven lanes of traffic, with no traffic congestion, by the way. And suburbs very distant from where people worked. 5 million people went through that exhibition, and when they left, they got a button that said, "I have seen the future." And this was the future that was being depicted, the good life. That you live in these places with these large traffic conveyor belts, but then you go and celebrate the good life in your suburban home with your outdoor pool and all these things. But as the problems of traffic congestion and isolation and disconnection in unwalkable cities and the inaccessibility of this dream started to become more and more clear, we started thinking about how can we envision something different? And we actually have a really hard time doing this. So I want to take you to my hometown. This is the city of Vancouver. And one thing I really appreciate is that we have this great city director whose name is Sadhu Johnston. And he said, we overestimate what can be achieved in 1 year and often underestimate what can be done in 5. So that's Vancouver in the 80s, and then this big transformation. By the way, do you recognize the look of the city? But we did actually stop a highway from coming into Vancouver when that was a critical decision to be made. It was a big protest and it didn't happen. Visualizations can help us to do this, to start imagining what's possible. This is part of the Greenest City Action Plan set of images. So here's a street in Vancouver. My dad drove my mom down the street when they first arrived to show a contrast with then driving up the Sea to Sky Highway to Whistler. He thought, I'll show her the worst and then show her the best, and then she'll be like, this is amazing, which did happen. She was like, this is awful, and then she's like, oh, this is nice. So Stephen Shepard and the team at University of British Columbia have actually created a visualization for this street of how it could look different. And I would say this is pretty typical of sustainable futures images. We seem to come back to the same things. I mean, if you Google green futures, you get windmills, bikes, community gardens, lots of people planting things, recycling, often someone helping someone across the street. And here's them all in one hand. I don't know how you do this kind of community, but it looks very intriguing. Or we see children flying kites or running with much energy and enthusiasm through fields, or looking at us expectantly with big smiles on their faces. Or things get a bit weird, like this one. This is the lily pad city, which is designed to be a self-contained human city off of the shore. So my question is, how do we build a richer futures literacy and a sense of the alternatives? How do we move beyond those few things that keep coming up? Well, here's one vision of Paris in 2050. So we're already at the streetscape, so that's already good. But look, it's very focused still on the buildings. I really appreciate this team. It's strategic design scenarios based in Brussels. Christophe Gouache and the founder François Gigoux. And what they do is they use all sorts of techniques, from videos to animation to exhibitions to snapshot postcards, to imagine not just these items in the future, but how they connect together as patterns of daily life. So when they show their futures, they're talking about the services and the hubs that you might visit, like the family takeaway, the food purchase group, the food atelier, the clothing care services, or the energy coach services. That whole idea that you need support at times. Urban gardens are back. Local organic canteens, vegetable bag subscriptions, urban composting ateliers, laundry on our rooftops. So what I like about the way they do it is they show these social practices and they kind of hint at the education and literacy that's in that future. They create snapshots of these futures. So here's an exhibition they did as a part of a workshop where they had these ideas up on the wall and the participants had to pull them apart and add their own ideas. It was kind of like they stepped into this future exhibition and then they could start to pull it apart themselves. Or in a more public setting, people have their own tickets and they basically create their own path through this exhibition. Here's me at the Disruptive Imaginings workshop picking out these snapshots with a team, and then we created a film, a day in the life of somebody living and experiencing this future. So you might be saying, yes, yes, Vanessa, but let me see what's on those cards other than that animation. So let's take a look. Let's go in. So here are some of the snapshots of the future that they have. I'm just going to show you 6 of them. Vegetarian as a default option on all catering. You have to look down here. Do you see the euros and the CO2 equivalents? So supermarkets indicating greenhouse gas emission statistics in every shopping cart. The reverse cookbook. What do you do with leftovers? Promoting sustainable cooking by reusing food leftovers and avoiding waste. Neighborhood workshops or do-it-yourself activities, like this textiles lab. What about integrating local logistics? If something's moving from one place to the other, how can they be connected? And then finally, what if the housing options in your city are about more dense and collaborative housing, not just individual places? So their main approach is to be interactive, to make it personal, to show a transition from today till tomorrow. And this is what I love, they make the intangible tangible. What could it look like in our daily lives? And these snapshots of the world are showing up all over. Here's one from South Africa, Blake Robinson at the Sustainability Institute. His picture of his current neighborhood, which he wants to transform. And then he's asking the question, what are some possible futures for this neighborhood? A smart city focused on sharing, but has problems with drones and inequality. Sure, there's more employment, but does it go to everybody? And you still see the slums in the background, by the way. They just have wind turbines above them. Or perhaps an entirely African sustainable future that's actually rooted in the cultural practices and ideas of that place. And much more interconnected with wildlife, with you can see already the hills behind have been transformed back into biodiverse areas and agricultural areas, but also kind of homegrown solutions are kind of the key of this. These two were part of an exhibition that was done by the place that I'm going to, Utrecht University's Urban Future Studio. And they had them in the middle of the city hall, these dreams of the future. And the other exhibition finalists were about the smells of the future. So you had to walk through this kind of padded space, and as you went through, you had all these smells. Like, what would that evoke? Some of them a little more tar-like, and other ones more kind of these hints of, woody smells, and you're like, oh, what would that be? And there was one that was a soundscape. So you'd sit, you can kind of see it in the background there. You'd sit in this helmet and go into an immersive soundscape. The white ones here, those are letters from people from the future that you opened and you could actually answer. And this is the winning one in the front here, an arc that travels from city to city, asking the city citizens to create their own principles or commandments for sustainability. And I want to just end with a colleague of mine, Stuart Candy, who is a guerrilla futurist. So Stuart's from Australia. He was spending his last little while in Toronto at the Ontario College of Art and Design, and also in Rio as part of a Futures exhibition there. And he's now at Carnegie Mellon University. And Stuart believes that we need to make the future not about images, but much more tangible. So he's always trying to create objects of the future or take over entire neighborhoods. He and his colleague Jack Dunnigan took over Chinatown in Hawaii, where they were studying, and transformed the space as if it was being taken over by commercial interests. And for 2 weeks, people were like, what's happening to this neighborhood? It's being sold off, it's being all this. And then they put up big boards. Imagine the future of Chinatown, come to the public event to dream of what it should be. And big turnout. Everyone's like, no! So there, he's really about kind of creating these objects, and he co-creates them. So you see down here a workshop in New York, people have all these objects, and their goal is to actually create an object from the future. So these are Medi-Boops. Those are for testing, these kind of test for breast cancer early. All the way over there is One Child, Fun Child. So this is about connecting people together to raise a child. How do you bring people together? Fingerprint erasers, what kind of world would that be in? Tranquil Smiles, to help yourself get ease. So it's these interesting things where he's basically saying things often express a lot about the culture and place and technology of how we're living at that time. If you want to try this out yourself, you can download the Thing from the Future card deck, which you see at the bottom, and you can print out these cards and try it yourself. So he thinks we need to move from these objects, this design fiction, to actually immersive experiences. And recently he did. He created Nature Pod. This is where people at the design show were invited to have a virtual nature experience as a break from their work. And he told them about the testing, that it reduces stress and anxiety, and there were all these people helping to sell these nature pods, and increases energy and focus and concentration. And you know, people were trying it and they're like, this is kind of weird. And then other people were like, okay, this is creepy. What are we doing putting nature in virtual reality? And others are like, I haven't felt this relaxed in weeks. Like, this is amazing. And what Stuart says, it looks like you're designing a product, but you're not. You're designing a high quality conversation. And he tested on all this. Is Stuart kind of getting people immersed in it and they're play acting around it. And he says, you know, by creating Nature Pod for the year 2021, it's a possibility to think and feel with, you know, it's a kind of possibility that we can play with. And then we give ourselves the opportunity to decide which way we want to go. Because ultimately, the real future is the one that's created by us. So in my last minute, I'm going to tell you a few more things about futures and invite you to join me on this journey. First of all, the idea is to create paradigm shifts. You want people to go, wait a minute, I had never thought about things from that perspective, right? I mean, that's a lot of how cultural change happens, right, in these kind of aha moments. Because we want to show not just singular futures, multiple futures, because we can't control that future, it's uncertain. For any of you who are hoping for the magic crystal ball story, it's just not happening. It's really not predetermined. It's not predictable. Instead, we have to learn to live with uncertainty. Because futures help us adapt to those emerging realities because we can look at them from different perspectives, but also shape the way we want to move forward, these new possibilities. So we can't predict the future, but we can learn from those future stories. And they help us turn around and look at the present with new eyes. And this is one of the things I learned from Nicole and from Adam Kahane, who's another futurist, and others who said, when they started, they would ask people, what will the future be? What will the future be? And people would be like, let's look at the trends and analyze out. And then they'd be like, okay, we can predict it. And then they're like, okay, that doesn't work. What should the future be? What should the future be? And then people were like, well, I think it should be this. It was very normative, right? Like pointing your finger, it should be like this. And then we started to realize, actually, what could happen is the most powerful, because that's when you get the creative power. It's not about prediction, it's about possibilities. So I want you to join me, you know, in this adventure, just like people in the 1600s set off without really a good map. And in fact, they were like, there be dragons. They had no idea what was out there. They're like, this is, you know, my friends David Maggs and Joe Tankersley talk about this, you know. They were leaving terra firma and they had maps, but the edges weren't always super clear, you know. They kind of were discovering as they went. So ultimately, these futures are not really a map, they're a compass. They show us possible ways of living in the world. And my invitation to you is to join me on this imagining. Join me in disruptive imaginings, because the assumption is we can create what we dream. So let's come back to today and to being here with all of you and my classmates who I adore. Here we are, and here we are. And I still say, hi, I'm Vanessa, I'm from Canada. Actually, there's a line in the Canadian anthem that I just love. It's this lovely line. It says, with glowing hearts, we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. And my Canadians are joining in already. True north, strong and free, you know, this idea of the compass. And we always need people to walk with us with a compass journey. John, Brenda, the ECI team, Ian, Clive, Tom, Christine, you know, all these people, all my classmates, all of you here. It's like being with Sherpas who kind of know some of the way. And as we walk, we create the path. So I just look forward to continuing to walk the path with all of you. Thank you.